Even though I didn't know him, I knew his brother a little bit. And my friend, knew him and his family. So when he asked us to go for a spin in the car, we said, yeah. We had no idea the risks involved. But I got into that car and that was it. That was a moment that changed my life forever. And I would go on to be abused mentally, sexually and physically for several years. I was also groomed into committing crimes as well.
Hello, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer, although earlier in the week, I was Phelim McElhinney.
That's true. Where do we go? Oh yes, we went to an event. We went to an event and we got those badges, and Phelim's badge said, Phelim's name tag said Phelim McElhinney.
Which is basically what I've always said I should wear anyway. Actually, I always said I should wear a name tag, where's Anne? Because everyone who comes up to me, they just go, oh, hi, where's Anne?
So popular.
It's like my name is where's Anne? So anyway, I got Phelim McElhinney.
Yes, I'm Anne McElhinney and this is Phelim McAleer. We're married, by the way. But welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Anne and Phelim Scoop, our podcast, our weekly podcast. Now, I know we're getting quite a lot of new viewers from our various projects. And so for those who don't know us, we are investigative journalists. We tell stories that mainstream legacy media would rather not report or rather hide. Mm-hmm. We do stories that are inconvenient to tell or inconvenient sometimes to hear, from abortion to climate change to Kevin Spacey to Ferguson to FBI corruption.
To grooming gangs in the UK.
Yes. So, in addition to this weekly podcast, we bring you special projects. We also have a Substack called stories.io. So please go, that's stories.io. Please go over there and subscribe. It'll be on the screen now, stories.io. And don't forget to subscribe. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for free. Or the Apple Podcasts, so that when you're always notified when the new podcast drops. I blame my inarticulacy there
on Barcelona.
On being to Spain recently.
Barcelona.
So we had tapas in Barcelona. That's why I cannot pronounce subscribe.
Okay.
Just press the subscribe button.
Okay, so what's on the show this week, Phelim?
This week. So original sin. Are you suggesting that Spanish accent is
a speech impediment?
Okay.
No.
Original sin. We look at President Joe Biden. A cancer diagnosis was announced over the weekend, just as a damning book comes out about the former president.
Seemed convenient?
Yes, we investigate the announcement and come to a conclusion that you won't necessarily see coming. Mm-hmm. Could the Biden family actually be telling the truth? And in other shocking news, we reveal how those who covered up Biden's very obvious decline are now shocked, I tell you.
Shocked, I tell you.
And are profiting from, in fact, their amazing discovery that a cover-up went on in this establishment.
And we have an extraordinary story from the UK, how the biggest crime in UK history led to the biggest cover-up in UK history. We've done a lot of work about the UK grooming gangs. And this week we're going to interview a survivor, an extraordinary survivor. You'll hear how the UK police and authorities refused to investigate for fear of being called racists.
So girls and women were sacrificed at the altar of political correctness.
And finally, the Eurovision Song Contest delivered a shocking result over the weekend for the Queers for Palestine people and for the River to the Sea contingent. Very shocking, very upsetting for all those people, but very, very good news for all men and women of goodwill around the world. And you're going to want to hang on for that because it's really inspiring.
And we have a new twist on the Comey Shell Shocker. Try saying that, isn't it?
Oh yeah, don't say that after 14 pints of beer. Okay.
Yes. And where in the world are Anne's earpods?
This is going to become a huge story, by the way. We're going to follow those earpods all over the world.
To the ends of the earth.
You'll be surprised where they are today. Yes. Or maybe not.
Maybe not. So, the show. Joe Biden, at the weekend, his family announced a cancer diagnosis. On Friday, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, characterized by a Gleason score of 9 with metastasis to his bone. In other words, cancer had spread to his bone. It continued while this represents a more aggressive form of the disease, the cancer appears to be hormone sensitive, which allows for effective management. So all the people that covered up Biden's cognitive decline, now that their colleague Jake Tapper is releasing a book saying Biden was part of the cover-up. See, they have to pretend that the Biden family and the Biden White House were part of a cover-up to absolve them from not covering the story. Oh, we were so misled. No, you were part of the cover-up. So they're all piling in there. All the leftists are piling in.
It's quite funny how overnight everyone's become this medical expert.
All these journalists, all these leftist journalists have suddenly become the most skeptical journalists on the planet. They were all sensing out a cover-up, whilst they were defenders and part of the cover-up for most of the Biden presidency. So suddenly they're all saying, we won't accept this. This is obviously a cover-up. For example, Joe Scarborough, who was the most sycophantic of them all, who was vicious actually in attacking anyone who questioned his cognitive abilities. This is Joe Scarborough on Monday morning to Dr. Zeke Emanuel on MSNBC. This is not speculation, right? He had it when he was president. And Dr. Zeke Emanuel said, yes, he did not develop it in the last 100, 200 days. He had it while he was president. He probably had it at the start of his presidency in 2021.
Wow.
I don't think there's any disagreement about that. And then News Nation, Dr. David Schusterman, they quoted him saying, it's very unlikely that someone who could get an annual checkups did not notice a PSA elevation. So that's what they're saying. Anyone, and he goes on, he had intensive state-of-the-art care where we can see prostate cancer 10 years in the past. So they're saying it's obviously a cover-up, and it's obviously to distract attention from this book coming out by Jake Tapper, more of which we'll talk about. Yale professor of radiology, Dr. Howie Foreman, wrote in the Daily Mail, it's inconceivable that this was not being followed before he left the president. Inconceivable. Noted that the test for prostate-specific antigen would have shown he had cancer for some time before his diagnosis.
So prostate-specific antigen obviously is what this PSA is, and I think it's detected if you look for it in blood. Is that correct?
That's correct. So it's the PSA. It's part of a routine blood test, the PSA number for men of a certain age, and it would have been obviously elevated if he had this aggressive cancer, and they pretended that it wasn't. They were covering up. However,
everyone seems to be saying that story.
Everyone. Well, they're now pretending these are the most evil cover-up people on the planet, and we were so fooled. This is, and now we're going to show them that we're not taking this. However, the truth is actually much more simple, and we have spoken to a relatively famous cancer expert. Now, we're not going to name this person, but you can guarantee that this person knows what they're talking about. This person spoke on background. We asked them about this diagnosis, the Gleason 9 diagnosis, and how it had spread to the bones. Because for the layperson, a cancer that has spread to someone's bones, that's obviously a long-standing cancer, and everyone knows that prostate cancer it takes a long time to develop. So they're bound to have noticed it. However, this person, they're not a Trump supporter, and definitely lean towards Biden, but on medical issues, their judgment can be trusted. Yes. And I asked, what are the chances that the cancer went undiscovered until now? And his response was, he saw that Joe Biden has been diagnosed with Gleason 9 prostate cancer with bone metastasis. And he said, I don't see any mention of his PSA. And he said, Gleason 9 prostate cancers grow very, very rapidly and spread early. And he said, are unusual in 83-year-olds. He says, Gleason 9 prostate cancers are frequently detected when they have already spread to the bones, when they've already metastasized.
Interesting.
So the fact that it spread to the bones does not show a cover-up. This often happens, that they're not detected until they've spread to the bones. And he said, they usually have a high PSA, and we don't know. So what does PSA stand for?
Prostate
specific antigens.
Yes.
They usually have a high PSA, but we don't know if his PSA was raised. I would have expected him to have annual PSA testing.
And it's interesting that it's not mentioned in their statements.
Yes. So that is a little black mark perhaps against the Biden family. If his PSA tests are not greatly raised, then this could be a prostate cancer presenting for the first time with bone metastasis at diagnosis. So he's saying it could be this type of cancer. And then the question is, well, how rare is this? How unusual is this? All he would say was, this Biden's explanation of his cancer, his family's, is medically plausible.
Yeah.
Not most likely, but it has happened. There is medical precedent for this. And this person, who is by the way, who is a doctor, not a journalist, within 10 minutes was able to send me 2 papers from respected medical journals, which actually, and it's unusual, but that prostate cancer, this Gleason 9 prostate cancer, would be diagnosed without a raised PSA. So you would not know in a blood test that they take every year. It would just suddenly present and it would be in your
Already
bones.
in the bones.
So there's this paper, which we're going to put up on the screen right now, and it's first published 8th of January 2007, and it's by all these, Dan Libovici, MD, Philip E. Spice, MD, Payush K. Agarwal, MD, lots of doctors, many doctors took part in it, and it's in the Journal of the American Cancer Society. The journal is called Cancer, and it's an international interdisciplinary journal of the American Cancer Society. This was published, as I say, 8th of January 2007. They noticed all these patients presenting, and the conclusion of the study...
Progression of PC may occur despite undetectable or low PSA levels.
PC stands for prostate cancer. Progression of prostate cancer may
occur despite undetectable or low
PSA levels.
Very interesting.
That means that Joe Biden could have been tested perfectly, and he just went for a final test, and suddenly he had cancer, this aggressive type of cancer that had spread to his bones. It is medically possible. It is a medically plausible explanation. And then there's a second study.
Biopsy-detected prostate cancer, including high-grade cancers, is not rare among men with PSA levels of 4.0 per ng per milliliter or less, levels generally thought to be in the normal range.
So it's not rare among men who have PSAs that are normal. So, as he said, and by the way, then you go down, that really got me, was you go down and there's all these other studies.
We can put them up on the page there.
Like, look at the last one there, prostate cancer with low PSA levels. This is actually, this is something we've always said, how journalists, when they don't want to discover a story, when they want to run with a story and they don't want any evidence to show that it's wrong, they suddenly forget how to use Google.
Yes.
This doctor I spoke to, found that, he says it was within 10 minutes. It was actually whilst I was on the phone with him.
Yes.
He found these studies, and there are many of them. And now the CBS and NBC and ABC and all these outlets and the New York Times have many, many medical correspondents.
But they're in a pile-on at the moment,
yes.
And they're not going to do anything to discredit their pile-on.
No, because their pile-on protects them who covered up. They're now pretending that Joe Biden is capable of covering up a medical condition. Therefore, he covered it up before, and what we didn't realize. So,
shocker.
So,
which brings us on to his other medical.
Well, I just want to say,
condition.
It's this is a historic moment, because I'm going to say now, it's very, very possible that Joe Biden and his family are telling the truth.
About
Biden,
the prostate cancer.
About Hunter Biden maybe telling the truth. So,
Hunter Biden.
Yes, as in, the family have released a joint statement. So, this is a man who, Hunter Biden, as I say, lied in his tell-all memoir. And so the family, it's very plausible. And journalists need, as I say, I used to say at speeches, we journalists, we have a thing that other people don't have.
Don't know anything about it.
Called
Googling. The Googling.
Yeah. So let's talk about Joe Biden's other health issues, his cognitive decline, and journalists Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper have released this book now called Original Sin, and they are shocked,
I tell you,
that senility was going on in the Oval Office during the Biden presidency.
No one had any idea.
No one had any idea, except in May 2024, I was in Dublin, and I went to a restaurant, and I met a friend who I won't say her name on air. And she's one of those, and there's a few of them around Ireland, many of them around Ireland. You meet them in England as well, who are obsessed with American politics, very often conservatives. And they know who's in the primaries. They know who's up, who's down. They watch all the podcasts and all the shows, and they'll watch Fox at night. And, and the moment we sat down, the first thing I think I said to her, she said to me was, So who's going to replace Biden? Now, remember, this was in May 2024,
Right.
before the debate. And it was like, and for us to be discussing that, we knew that Joe Biden was not going to be the candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a similar conversation in another household in Ireland around the same time. Who's going to replace Biden? Because we knew. Do you remember we had that conversation with that journalist in DC as well? Who was going to replace Joe Biden? So we knew, and someone only watching clips and bits and bobs from Ireland knew that Joe Biden had severe cognitive decline, so much cognitive decline that he wasn't going to be the representative.
But the White House pool of journalists didn't notice.
Yes. I mean, this is a man who called President, in July 2024, before the debate, called President Zelensky President Putin.
Yes.
This is a man who forgot his defense secretary's name and called him the black man.
Oh,
yes.
dear.
The producers are laughing actually at this, but that genuinely happened. And this is a man who sent a letter of condolence to a congresswoman, Jackie Walorski, and then at a rally a few weeks later says,
Representative Jackie, where's Jackie?
Yeah, she's
Yes.
she, no matter how loud you shout, Joe, you won't get her. You know, so this was as obvious as the nose on my face. And for them to pretend that there was a clever up. By the way, where was the White House pool? You know, everyone's going, it's really terrible the way the Trump press office have said, you know, you can't be on the pool. Only these people can be in the pool. The pool are useless. This is what these are the people who accompany the president all around to the fundraisers, to the boring stuff, just in case something big happens. But they also are supposed to report on what happens. And, you know, there's all these things now coming out about Biden needed yellow tape to show him where to walk. For the smallest fundraiser opening remarks, he needed a teleprompter. They didn't report on any of that. They covered it up. The journalists covered it up. Don't believe them that they're the victims in this. They're the criminals. So that's why they're very, very animated about Biden's cancer and the cover-up. I'm not saying it's not a cover-up, but it's very medically plausible. And as journalists, we are obliged to tell you that. And they are obliged to tell you that.
An extraordinary story. And it'll be interesting to see how the book does, by the way. That's just come out this week.
It'll probably do very well. It's getting a lot of coverage. Yeah.
So you may have heard a lot about the UK grooming gangs of mostly Muslim men abusing mostly white young girls, and the police the police covering it up for fear of being called racist. We just released a filmed reenactment of one of the judgments called The Grooming Gangs Cover-Up, which you can watch, by the way, on YouTube. And it was an appalling scandal. And that particular, the Grooming Gangs Cover-Up covers the actual verbatim words of a judge in one of the court cases in Oxford. But there's hundreds of them. But go and watch that if you want to get a sample of just how pervasive and vile and awful this was. But I spoke earlier to Sammy Woodhouse, who is an extraordinary... one of the child victims, by the way. She's an adult woman now who has been an incredible activist, an incredible fighter for people like herself who are caught up in this nightmare. Mm-hmm. So I want to go over to that interview right now.
The interview which you are about to see contains retellings of violence against women and girls, including sexual abuse. Young or sensitive audiences may want to leave the room or skip ahead.
So our special guest on the podcast this week is Sammy Woodhouse, my dear friend Sammy Woodhouse. She is a documentarian, a best-selling author and activist, and her book, Just a Child, tells the horrific story of the UK grooming gangs through her own story of abuse when she was just 14. She has since emerged as a beacon of resilience and a voice for advocacy for other victims of exploitation. Welcome to the podcast, Sammy.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. So, interestingly enough, for US audiences, a lot of them don't know much about the UK grooming gangs. So, can we start in a general way by talking what does that mean? What is the grooming gangs scandal in the United Kingdom?
Well, they are children for decades right across the country that have been groomed, abused, trafficked, tortured, raped, impregnated, criminalised and even murdered by gangs of men. And in some towns where there's been evidence, such as Rotherham, which is my hometown, the evidence showed that majority of these perpetrators were Pakistani Muslim men, that majority of the victims were white female children. And not only was this taking place, but authorities such as police, social care, and, this went all the way right up to the Home Office. Professionals were turning a blind eye. They was directly involved, but they've also, covered this scandal up. And as I say, something that's been happening for decades.
One of the really awful things that came out of this whole thing is the fact, is exactly what you said, is that the local authorities and people who should have been able to help and should have been helping covered it up. And what was the reason they gave for why they didn't act?
They were scared to be called racist or Islamophobic. So it was easier to turn a blind eye to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children. And we still to this day don't know exactly the figures of how many children this has happened to, because what we also know is they've not even been collecting the accurate data. So they've not even been recording, people's ethnicities. Now, of course, we know that all races commit exploitation and all races can be a victim to it. I said, this can happen to any child, and it can. But the fact that they've not even been recording such key and important information just speaks volumes of, how little they actually thought of us.
And you say, and I think the facts have borne this out, that a very large majority of the people perpetrating these horrendous crimes on children were Pakistani Muslims. How big a population of Pakistani Muslims are there in the United Kingdom?
I'll be honest, I've not got the figures in front of me. There's a big debate around the race issue, and, the Home Office report that got done years ago, and it was saying that, majority of paedophiles are, white. What we've got to remember is majority of the population, in the UK is our white people. So, of course, it's going to be higher. But when you start and look and break down all the stats of just how many, for example, people are from, Pakistani Muslim background, the scale of this happening is really concerning. And still, after this, this has been exposed now, not something recently. I know, Elon Musk has been highlighting this from, I think, January. Yes. But people like myself, we've been exposing this for well over 12 and 13 years. And this is a major, major issue and we still today can't have a conversation, an open and honest conversation, that they are a large portion of, Pakistani Muslim men committing these crimes. We get called racist or Islamophobic. Now, I don't care what race, what religion, what gender you are. If you are raping and, trafficking children, you've got to be stopped.
At the very heart of this story, of the start of your story, is your own story, which is horrific and started when you were just 14. Can you walk us through what happened to you?
Of course. And I'll start with just a little bit of background about my family, if that's all right, because there's a lot of people that think that you can only be exploited if you come from a really bad family and if you're in care, and that wasn't my situation at all. So I came from what I would describe as a working class family. I lived with both my parents and my two older sisters in a small town in north of England called Rotherham. And as a child, I was confident, I was bright, I was popular, I had lots of friends. I always say there was nothing vulnerable about me apart from the obvious, and that was I was just a child. But I loved to dance, so I was a very active child, and I was always involved in sports. But dancing was what I loved to do, and I would travel all around the country, competing for my little gold medals. And, that's what I thought I was always going to be when I was older. I thought I was going to be the world's greatest dancer. Of course, it didn't turn out that way. But just after my 14th birthday, I was on my local shop with a friend, and a silver sports car started to drive up the street, and a man got out the car. He was called Arshad Hussain, but his nickname was Madash. And he started talking to my friend. And I'll never forget this moment. He was very muscly. You could tell he was working out in the gym. He had designer clothes on, a big gold chain. He was very good looking as well. And I felt, kind of that instant of, I kind of fancy him. Who is this guy? And even though I didn't know him, I knew his brother a little bit. And my friend, knew him and his family. So when he asked us to go for a spin in the car, we said, yeah. We had no idea the risks involved. But I got into that car and that was it. That was the moment that changed my life forever. And I would go on to be abused mentally, sexually, and physically for several years. I was also groomed into committing crimes as well. I was made pregnant twice. First time when I was 14, I was forced to have an abortion. And the second time when I was 15, I was allowed to keep my second child because the authorities said they wouldn't prosecute him. But I just want to kind of touch on the grooming process, which is the first process.
Thank you.
Because I hear so many people say we're not allowed to call it grooming because it's not as, it's not as serious as the word rape. But I don't want people to underestimate just how dangerous the grooming process is, because out of, all of my abuse, and mental, physical and sexual, it's a mental abuse and that grooming process that has affected me and probably will do till the day I die. But I always say the grooming process is the most dangerous of crimes, and that's for two reasons. One, because it's a silent crime, so it happens without you even knowing it's happening. But also, it's an enjoyable crime. And I spoke to many survivors that say, Sammy, I'd never admit that publicly. There's so much victim blaming. But he came into my world and found out everything there was to know about me, who my friends were, my family, what music I liked, what movies, what school I went to. And he made me feel so, kind of good about myself. And even though I was a confident child anyway, he gave me a different kind of attention that I would get from parents or friends. And he would tell me I was funny, I was intelligent. And, I even remember learning him how to read and write because he didn't know how to read and write. He would buy me anything I needed, whether it be, food or, he would buy me gifts such as flowers. He kind of came to me as Prince Charming. But then when he took, all that information, he then took me into his world, which of course was very different to mine. It was very violent, very dark and dangerous. And once I was inside of that, it was very, very difficult to get out of it. But I never saw him as, a paedophile, because I was taught what a paedophile was. It was some fat old man that was looking out of his flat, watching school kids and... or somebody that would pull up in a van, offer you some sweets, kidnap you, and you never see your mum and dad again. And of course, he didn't fit that description. He wasn't what I was taught a paedophile was. And of course, all my friends was also being groomed. So it wasn't, I wasn't asking question marks of, why is an older man interested in me when it's happening to everyone around me? But my parents found out within days of me meeting this man, what I now thought was my boyfriend. And of course, he wasn't happy. He was, 10 years older. He was also known to all services for being a very dangerous man. He wasn't just exploiting children. He was involved in all different kinds of crime, whether it be stealing cars, drug dealing, you name it, he was involved in it. And my parents contacted the police and they said, well, Sammy's making a lifestyle choice. And of course, I didn't recognise.
14.
Yeah. And as I say, I wasn't the first person to be abused by this man. He was well on the radar of authorities at this point. But I started going missing for days, weeks, even months at a time. And I was everywhere, in hotels, flats, houses. And I even moved in with his family as well. Now, what I found out later on is that he was actually married with children. But when I got told he was married, he lied. His solicitor lied to me and said that he was divorced and that, there was just that contact there with his children. So I even went and took his children out as well and, I suppose played stepmom at just 14 years old. It was ludicrous. But my parents really struggled to cope and they put me on something what's called a Section 20, which meant they was putting me into foster care, but they still held full parental responsibility. And they did that thinking that would keep me safer, which of course it backfired. And the authorities said he could have full access to me as long as I met him at the top of the street and I was back for 10 o'clock. And they wanted me to go to school because I'd missed a lot of my schooling, my education. I think about 9 months I didn't go to school for. So when I went back, I was just on a part-time table. But I started to really change as a child. I wasn't this happy, bubbly Sammy, anymore. with my gold medals. I switched my gold medals to then, kind of carrying a gun or committing crime. So, like, for example, on my 15th birthday, I was expecting flowers. He took me on my very first armed robbery. So now every year my birthday comes around, which is actually coming up, I think of him, he's kind of done so much just to completely take over my life, even though he's still not in it. But my will just changed, and I was just, I suppose, in this war zone. And unfortunately, the very authorities that should have been protecting me didn't. Yeah. And I saw police officers doing a lot of bad things. They was buying drugs off him. They was passing on information. One of the police officers that was dealing on my case even asked me out on a date when he came to my parents' home, when I was at this point, kind of trying to raise the alarms. I tried on many occasions to try and leave, which he always tried to stop me and tried to kill me or beat me up. There was one occasion when he dragged me into the car with my hair and he started speeding towards the top of the street, and he drove through 2 parked cars and into a church. And I was actually pregnant at the time with my son. We got rushed into hospital, and the doctors actually put us into separate rooms because they didn't want to upset his wife, which was now on the way to the hospital to kind of see him, from the accident. There was also another occasion when I tried to end things, and we was in the car and he was screaming at me and he was saying if he couldn't have me, no one could. And he started speeding towards the edge of what I describe as a hilltop. So this is a really high place that overlooks all of Rotherham. And he said he was going to drive off it and kill us both. Now, right at the last minute, he slammed the brakes on. I got out the car and I was physically sick. And he took me to the edge and said he was going to throw me off it. And at that moment, I honestly thought, this is where my life is going to end. And I was that terrified. I actually wet myself. And he placed me into the back of the car and had sex with me, I mean, if you could actually call it that, as though nothing had happened whatsoever. And I remember just laying there, and I remember I was crying, but it was a silent cry. And all I kind of felt like was I was this dead body on a slab in a morgue. And I knew he was the cause of that, and I had this constant pain, from everything that was happening. I just couldn't figure out how to get away from him because, even times when I'd spoke to my foster carer and said, if he calls me, I don't want to speak to him. And she'd say, well, you may as well just speak to him because you're going to get back with him. And she even invited him on holiday with us to a caravan park. He was meant to stay the weekend with us. He didn't stay as long as what he should have because he robbed the hotel, or the B&B as what they call it. So, I was never treated as a victim. I was always treated as a mistress or somebody that was a part of the gang, and I was failed.
Oh God, extraordinarily failed. How did you escape? How did you eventually escape from his grip?
So he got sent to prison. He kidnapped somebody and he stabbed him, I think it was 12 times with a screwdriver. And he only got sent to prison for, I think, about 6 months. But that time kind of, gave me that opportunity to kind of break away from him. And I moved back into my parents, or started spending a lot of time there, because he broke down all my relationships with family and friends. I was very isolated. And I gave birth to my son. He's now 23, but that changed a lot for me when my son was born, because at this point I'd still not recognised I was a victim of exploitation. What I saw this as was, this is my boyfriend, he's very violent towards me, and I just want it to stop. And when my son was a couple of months old, I should just get out of prison, and I bumped into him in Rotherham Town Centre, and he was trying to talk me round, but I was staying firm. I was saying, no, I don't want anything to do with you. So he grabbed me by my throat and he hung me over the top floor balcony in the shopping centre. And luckily his brother and his friend was there and they dragged him off me. But he was screaming, he was shouting, he was spitting at me, he called my son a black bastard, and he kicked my son's pushchair over with me 3-month-old son inside it. So I grabbed the pushchair and I just started running, and I ran to a phone box. and I pushed my son inside it and he was chasing me. But I remember phoning my sister so she could actually hear everything what was happening now. And again, his brother came and said, the police are going to be, we've got to leave. And that was the first time I agreed to South Yorkshire Police to give official statements against him. Because even though I was always open about, kind of a lot about what was going on, this was me, kind of finally going on record. So there was my statement, CCTV. There was witnesses there that was willing to come forward as well. And the officer come out, I still remember his name, he was called PC Safri. He took the statement and it was a complete waste of time. He actually turned around and said, whilst, in front of me and my dad, well, what do you expect? He's got every right to do that because you stopped him from seeing his son.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, my dad went ballistic. My dad was so angry and he said, get out of my house. And the police officer apologised and he continued to take my statement. But yeah, it was a waste of time because they never even went to question him. In fact, when I came forward, I'm going to jump a little bit here, but when I came forward when I was 27 years old, I was told he'd never at that point even been questioned until that very moment. But I pretty much at 16 just had to move out of my flat that I just got because someone set fire to it. So my family had to move. And I suppose I pretty much just went into witness protection, but without the help of the authorities. The authorities closed my case down. They said that because I came from a supportive family, I no longer needed that support. I went and got my own court order so he couldn't come near me because the Home Office researcher was advising people not to get me a court order in case it made him angry. So I went out and took my own private protection against him. And a couple of years later, he got shot and he became paralysed. So he moved out of Rotherham. So my life went quiet for quite a while, but it took me such a long time to kind of deal with, the fact that I was a victim of exploitation. I just didn't recognise it. And through life, I had many problems, with relationships, friendships, very suicidal with mental health. So it wasn't until I was 27 years old that I started to come to terms with what had happened. I was reaching out to authorities, to the police to try and, kind of get help and take action. And they just weren't interested. So what I did was I went and got all my own evidence. I got social care files, police files, medical records, and I started recording police officers on my mobile phone. And I contacted a journalist called Andrew Norfolk who worked at the Times newspaper in London. He actually very sadly passed away just last week.
I know that. I read what you wrote about him because this guy is like obviously a major hero to you. Tell me about the journalist. When you brought everything to the journalist? Tell me what happened.
Now at this point, Andrew had actually been trying to expose Rotherham before me, and he'd been speaking to survivors, family members, and whistleblowers, and he was publishing this evidence, and nothing was happening. People was getting ignored or investigated, and I remember being sat on the sofa with Andrew and he said to me, this is it. This is my last shot at trying to expose Rotherham. If your case doesn't work, nothing will.
Yeah.
Because I had such a strong case and, of course, I had DNA evidence from my son, which police was even refusing to take. So Andrew published my story in August 2013, but I wasn't known as Sammy at that point. I hid my identity. He called me Jessica. Now, before my story went to print, Andrew, of course, had to contact South Yorkshire Police and Rotherham Council to give them a right to reply. Yes. So they knew that it was me, kind of coming forward with this story. And they tried to keep me silent. They told Andrew if he would publish that story, that he would jeopardise the investigation because I'd now kind of saying, I want to go on record and kind of do this police investigation. Mm-hmm. And, I remember as well, Andrew saying to me, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to run the story or not? And I said, yeah, run it. I don't trust them. And thank God he did, because me and Andrew had no idea what was about, what we was about to expose and uncover. But yeah, it commissioned the Alexis J report, which showed that 1,400 children in my hometown in a short period of time had been groomed, abused, raped, tortured, trafficked, some even murdered as well. And yeah, the
1,400.
authorities had covered it up. But I also went on record, which is, again, thanks to Andrew Norfolk and the Times, and what we now know opened the biggest criminal investigation in abuse in our history.
In UK history, yeah.
Yeah, so, that's something I'm really proud of. But of course, I had no idea.
And you should be. And you should be.
I knew that there was others, because that's the reason why I come forward. If I thought this was just about myself, I'll be honest, I wouldn't have come forward. But I had no idea the scale of it. And those investigations are actually still ongoing. And I'm going back now, August 2013. The National Crime Agency took that over. But I decided, when I was speaking out to Andrew, that I would continue to speak out, because it was making a huge difference. People was coming forward to the police. I was changing policy. I was changing laws. I was raising awareness.
One of those laws that you changed was the right of this bizarre law in the UK where a rapist would had parental rights to see his child. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in 2018, I did another exposure again with Andrew Norfolk. We were partners in crime, as you could say. But Rotherham Council had invited my rapist into court proceedings so he could apply for contact or custody over my son, which obviously was born from my rape. Now, sorry, I missed a little bit of my story out. So when I went to Andrew Norfolk and the Times and it started the criminal investigation, a 3-year investigation, went underway, and we got to court, and he was sentenced for crimes of what he did to me and other children, and he was sentenced to 35 years in prison.
35 years. It's one of the longest sentences for any of the people involved in this grooming gangs. And as you said, he abused nine children in total.
Yeah, I mean, there was over 54 linked to him, but not everyone has come forward. But yeah, he received the highest sentence, again, in our history. A lot of things that happened with my case, because, it was years ago and exploitation wasn't kind of really talked about or discussed.
Yes.
We was able to kind of, do a lot of landmark cases with a court case, with the sentences and lots of things. And, we hope that would carry out and be enrolled throughout the country, which it's a shame it didn't. But yeah,
that was what I was going to ask you. That was what I was going to ask you. Has anything changed since, in the intervening years in the UK?
There has, however, not enough. Now, with the amount of evidence, because this isn't just Rotherham, this is happening throughout the UK. With the amount of evidence that has come to light, absolute mountains should have been moved to protect children.
Yes.
And even though, yes, I've worked very hard for policy and law change and awareness and all the rest of it, and I've, worked with police, social care, schools, I don't feel enough is being done. And I kind of feel like at the moment we've gone backwards. I kind of felt at one point really positive and people was listening, and then all of a sudden it's just stopped. I don't know if that's changing governments, but, I'm no fan of Labour, but the Tories were equally to blame as well. They've been in government for many, many years. So, yeah, I do feel very, very frustrated. But the law you were talking about, so when I exposed it in 2018 to strip rapists of their parental rights, that's something that I'm still fighting. So there's been laws and policy change around that. But I've actually got a little bit of an update about this week. So I've got to just do a little bit of chasing for that. But we might have got some good news on that. We'll see.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I mean, kind of an extraordinary thing. Your story is amazing, but honestly, what you have done to expose this has been heroic, and your resilience is very, very inspirational, by the way.
Thank
I mean,
you.
really extraordinary. And, don't stop doing what you're doing. I mean, it's really extraordinary. Can you share with our listeners, how can they find you on social media, and where can they find your book?
So I've just got a new website, which is sammywoodhouse.co.uk. So there's a lot more information on there. Also, you can purchase my book on there, but it's also available on Amazon as well. I am on social media. I'm on X. I've just set up a YouTube channel. I'll be honest, and I'm absolutely terrible when it comes to technology and social media. So I'm only just getting going on some of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just setting up my channels as well. But if you type in official Sammy UK across social media, then I should be there.
Okay, well, listen, we are so glad to have met you on the Mark Stein cruise. He's great for bringing people together, and we're so glad that you could come on the podcast, and we will keep in touch because we'd like to keep updated on this story, this extraordinary story. And if it can happen in the UK, it can happen anywhere, by the way.
It does. It happens all over the world, definitely.
Thank you, Sammy.
Thank you for having me.
So as I said at the beginning, I would recommend people to go and look at the filmed reenactment that we did, which is called Grooming Gangs Cover Up, and it's available on YouTube. But we would say there's a slight warning with that, because it's the material in that reenactment, which is verbatim from a court case, is very, very disturbing.
Yes.
So, Phelim, over the weekend, the Eurovision Song Contest happened.
Yes.
And you know, it's become very, very political actually of late, and it really usedn't to be super political. I suppose it used to be somehow there was a little bit of, you know,
historic righting of wrongs.
Yes.
Yeah, England used to give Ireland 12 points, and Ireland used to give England 0 points.
Yes, there was a little bit of that.
England felt guilty, and Ireland felt angry. You know.
So a lot of people were watching what was going to happen this year, because obviously Israel was in the Eurovision Song Contest, as it was last year as well. And what actually happened over the weekend is actually kind of wonderful and extraordinary, and is deserving of commentary here. And I was trying to work out how to talk about that, and then I found on Twitter an account that I think cannot be bettered, and you can't better a description than take the description yourself. And I've been following this wonderful cardiologist on Twitter. His name is Afshin Emrani, and I'd highly recommend people, by the way, to follow this guy. He describes himself as a cardiologist, internist, Jew, Zionist, and on and on and on, but he's a really wonderful writer. And here's what he says about what happened at the weekend with Yuval Raphael, who was the singer who represented Israel. Here's what the doctor said. Some stories must be told, because even in the deepest shadows, light still burns. This is Yuval Raphael, a 24-year-old Israeli woman. On October 7, 2023, she was dancing with friends at the Nova Music Festival. Then came the sirens, the screams, the gunfire. She ran to a bomb shelter, the same one you're seeing in the photo now. She called her father. She thought it was goodbye. He told her, hang up, play dead, it's your only chance. We're going to listen to a little bit of that right now.
מסתובבים, אבא תשלחו ניידות. תהי מתה, יובלי תהי מתה, תנתקי את הטלפון ממני, תהי מתה.
So she did. She played dead. When a masked terrorist stormed the shelter and opened fire, Yuval lay still as they murdered everyone around her. She stayed beneath their bodies for 8 hours, not moving, not making a sound, barely breathing. 8 hours between life and death. 8 hours buried beneath her friends. But she survived. And last night, this is the night of the Eurovision, she did something no one could have imagined. She took second place in the Eurovision Song Contest, one of the biggest music events in the world. She's not a professional singer.
I didn't know that. She certainly
This was her first try.
She certainly sounded like a professional singer.
She stood on that stage, trembling but radiant, and sang her heart out with love, light and fierce hope. And the world tried to silence her again. Countries tried to ban her on the competition.
Ireland was the leader trying to ban her.
Yes.
And it was the National Union of Journalists who led the charge
Ireland,
trying to ban her.
Broadcasters refused to air her performance. Crowds booed and waved enemy flags. She received death threats, hate speech, and was nearly attacked on stage. Still, she stood. After the jury vote, she was ranked 15th. So there was a jury vote in every one of the countries. The elite jury vote. But then came the popular vote. But then came the voice of the people. Millions across Europe and the world voted for her. She won the popular vote by a landslide. Nearly 300 points more than anyone else.
Yeah.
Why? This is the doctor, the cardiologist says. Because truth rings louder than lies. Because courage shines brighter than fear. Because light always finds a way. Yuval is not just a singer. She is a symbol of survival, of resilience, of the unbreakable spirit of a people who choose life again and again. So remember her. When the world feels heavy with hate, remember Yuval. When you feel small and powerless, remember Yuval. When you wonder if light can still win, remember Yuval. As she said after her song, "Thank you, Europe. Thank you, Europe. Am Yisrael Shai." Yes, despite it all, we live. Which I just thought was amazing. Unfortunately, we can't play the song for you because of copyright issues, but we'll put a link of where you can listen to the song yourself, because it's really worth listening to the song. It's absolutely amazing. We think she should have won, by the way. But in more glorious news, by the way, the Irish public, so the Irish, funny enough, the Irish elite jury gave her 7 points, which is okay, by the way. But the Irish public gave Israel its second highest votes. And that really angered the Queers for Palestine people, by the way. And there's the voting. I just put up there on screen, the Irish voting. We gave 12 to Poland, which, by the way, giving 12 to Poland, Ireland, by the way, is full of Polish people. Yes. And I thought, so everyone loves the Polish people in Ireland. So that's how they probably got the 12 votes. But I think the 10 votes from Ireland, from the popular vote, is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, so Israel got 10 points.
Israel got 10 points, exactly.
Yes.
And it was, I mean, just an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, and I have to laugh. So Spain, which has been one of the most virulent campaigners, the Spanish public broadcaster and the people working there, they put up a sign before she sang, and I mean, they were just awful. Completely, these are public broadcasters who are supposed to be neutral, but they were very, very anti-Israel and very anti-her. The public there give her a vote, the maximum votes. And what do they want to do? The same as they're doing in Romania and all these other places. They want to change the voting system.
Now they want to change the voting system.
Because they've lost, because the people have spoken. So that is a feel-good story.
It really is.
We've got some great comments. We wanted to read some comments from you people. Please leave comments in the YouTube section and in the Apple podcast section. Like there's Matilda, F1X. Really grateful for podcasts like this one, challenging what we're fed daily. And this is about a story we did last week from Muna Meadow, 1865. The truth about the abortion pill is terrifying, and she's correct there.
And then I love this. A lot of people have been following, particularly Alicia Angel, who has been a big fan of ours for a long time, and she's loving the whole story about the AirPods who are on their travels, and everybody wants to monitor how the AirPods are getting on. The AirPods, I can tell you today, are still in Banja Luka. So
you need to tell people about the AirPods now.
People who don't know about the AirPods.
Yes,
so that's true.
It's
actually
called context.
That's right. Very important context. So basically, we were on the Mark Stein cruise. We were speakers on the Mark Stein cruise very recently, and I left my AirPods behind me. And I've been watching their travels around the world
on the Find My AirPods app.
So for a very long time they were on the seas, on the high seas. They were in Norway, as we said. They were in Tenerife. They've been all over the place, having a fantastic time.
And there was the possibility that they were still on the ship, hidden. However, the fact that they were continually being charged did suggest that they were found.
It's quite funny, but by the way, today they're separated. The two AirPods are separated from each other, and the battery is getting very low. So hopefully the battery will be recharged, and we'll be able to continue to follow my AirPods traveling.
I wonder, has someone
worked out what's going on?
Because we have written to Celebrity Cruises, and they may be doing a little inquiry, so somebody may have thrown them in the trash.
We'll see. But somebody, I see, by the way, Alex has written as well, and one of our listeners, and said, save the pods.
Yes.
It's very important. And Phelim, tell us about, we have one more story before we go.
Well, it's just a little story about Mr. Comey, our old nemesis from the FBI, who doesn't know that 86 is a slang term for kill or get rid of.
Or he pretends not to know that.
So he took a picture of 8647, so kill the president. So that's the former head of the FBI. So then other people have been a lot of fun with this, with AI, and there's that.
Yeah, because James Comey basically is saying, I was just walking along the beach, and I just came across this thing. So people now are writing exactly the same thing, and they're saying, I was just walking along the beach, and look what I saw. So here's one, like Trump 1, all done out in shells. And here's another one. Trans
women are men, which is pretty good. Oh, God, that's a disgusting one.
And I love this one. Sorry, we have to put that up. Actual photo of James Comey finding the 8640 shell formation on the beach. Those of you who are listening to this rather than looking at this on video, maybe it's a good thing, actually, because it's the head of James Comey juxtaposed with the body of a woman in a bikini.
Yeah, then the next one is arrest Comey, which is pretty good. And then Look at that one.
Love that one.
Yes, watch the Anne and Phelim scoop spelt out in shells, which may have been AI assisted, let's say. Okay, that's the end of the show for this week. So please don't forget to leave your comments. Don't forget to go to stories.io Substack, where we're going to actually be publishing the Joe Biden story with screen grabs of those studies to show you just how the mainstream media is lying to you yet again, but you knew that. So thank you very much and see you next week.
Bye.